Elise Dufresne had always been a businesswoman of character. Her sharp gaze and arrogance made her a respected, but also feared, figure in the business world. People who knew her knew that she brooked no weakness and had no qualms about crushing those who got in her way. She was the embodiment of success in a world where appearance and privilege mattered more than anything. Raised in an elite family, Elise learned at a very young age that money and social position were the keys to advancement. The very idea that a parallel world could exist, a world without these privileges, seemed absurd to him. For her, first class on international flights was not just a comfortably furnished cabin. It was natural territory, reserved for people like her. The powerful, the influential, those who had proven their worth in an increasingly competitive world. In this space, the other passengers were blurry figures, who existed only to serve her own needs, and Elise had no patience for those who were not up to her standards. When she boarded her flight to New York, a slight satisfied smile appeared on her lips. She looked critically at the other passengers seated in the cabin. At first glance, they all seemed decently settled, but she knew none of them really deserved to be there. They were nothing compared to her, a great lady of the business world. She sat comfortably in her leather chair, adjusting the position of her legs to relax. The softness of the cushions, the delicate scent in the air, and the dim lighting of the cabin contributed to his feeling of superiority. The crew on board, with fixed smiles and measured gestures, took care of her with the greatest delicacy, bringing a glass of champagne, an attention that she considered well-deserved. But this comfort, this special treatment, this world reserved for him, was suddenly disrupted when the man entered the cabin. She noticed it immediately. He didn't seem to fit the image she had of first-class travelers. A black man, with features marked by life experience, an impeccable suit, but almost embarrassingly simple for someone as important as he could be. He did not wear an ostentatious watch or excessive tie. Nothing luxurious looking. In fact, he seemed almost devoid of any pretension. The man advanced, his steps sure, but discreet. He had neither the impatient speed of those seeking attention, nor the ostentation of people accustomed to privileges similar to his own. With a calm step, he sat down next to her, in the neighboring armchair, without saying a word. This innocuous gesture disturbed Elise more than she would have imagined. Why did this man choose to sit there? Why did a person like him, with his air of calm and simplicity, feel at ease in this environment where every gesture, every word seemed calculated? She scrutinized him discreetly at first, but the more she observed him, the more destabilized she felt. He seemed completely at ease, as if his place in first class was obvious to him. His eyes, imbued with a serenity that she did not understand, scanned the horizon, without ever meeting his gaze. This contrast disturbed her deeply. A black man in first class? This was simply unacceptable in his world of privilege, a world where the elite was clearly defined by skin color and accumulated money. A feeling of irritation rose within her, although she tried to hide it. In this world, where every detail was a measure of a person's worth, this man seemed out of place, an intruder. A stranger, in a way. She took a moment to look at him more, then leaned toward the hostess, a young, bright-eyed blonde woman who was handing out drinks. His gaze pierced the hostess like an arrow. "Excuse me, but I think there is a mistake. This man, he shouldn't be here." The hostess, visibly taken by surprise, hesitated. She glanced furtively at the man, then walked away quickly, without responding, a discretion that did not escape Elise. It was an awkward moment. This confusion only made her feel worse. She leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms firmly, smiling a little, convinced that we would quickly resolve this error, which was tarnishing her flight. A few seconds later, the hostess returned, but this time, Elise did not wait. The hostess had barely left when Elise made a remark out loud, thinking that the man was ignoring her. "You know, some people think they can do anything just because they wear a suit. But, you should know that there are places reserved for people like you, but not here." The silence that followed this reply seemed unreal. The man slowly turned his head towards her. His gaze, neutral at first, became more intense. Although he didn't react immediately, Elise felt the tension building inside her. That look. That look, calm and implacable, assessed her in a way that destabilized her more than anything. As if he knew exactly what she was thinking, what she was feeling. He was not offended. He was just quiet. He replied in a tone of icy calm. "I am perfectly in my place, madam." His voice was soft, almost imperceptible, but each word carried a heavy charge of certainty. He barely raised his voice, but his response struck straight to Elise's heart. This sovereign calm, this quiet assurance, destabilized her even more. She had never met someone so calm in the face of her attacks, someone who did not seem to move an inch under the pressure of her judgment. His world had just shattered. Anger quickly rose within her. She couldn't bear the idea that this stranger, who seemed so detached, dared to answer her like that. How dare he challenge her so cold-bloodedly? She waited a few seconds, her mind searching for a way to regain control of the situation, then called the hostess again, in a sharp tone. This time the hostess arrived more quickly, but looked uncomfortable, as if she sensed something unexpected was happening. "There was a mistake, this man," began Elise, but the hostess interrupted her. "Madam, this gentleman paid well for his first-class seat." Elise, perplexed, tried to drive the point home even further. "That's not what I mean. This man, he doesn't have the profile to be here." The hostess, in a slightly firmer tone, replied, "I assure you, madam, that he is exactly where he should be." She added with a hint of confusion, almost imperceptible, "You can consult the information if you wish." Elise, upset, muttered, "I don't believe a word of it." But the hostess left her there, without further comment, as if she had just informed her that she was just a small disturbance in a much larger and more complex world. The man remained calm, implacable, not even bothering to respond. He just looked ahead, as if the conversation no longer had any importance. She, on the other hand, couldn't take her eyes off him. There was something in his attitude that deeply intrigued him, something that contradicted his certainties, but his pride prevented him from admitting it. The minutes dragged on. Elise, increasingly irritated, sat back in her seat, crossing her arms, casting furtive and annoyed glances at the passenger next to her. The discomfort she felt became palpable. This guy, sitting next to her, allowed himself to defy the implicit order that she believed to be hers, that of people who matter. But he seemed not to realize the role he was supposed to play. He was supposed to be an extra in this scene where she was the star, where she dominated everything. Her gaze pierced the space around her again. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was happening as she had anticipated. It was then that an unexpected event occurred, something so ordinary, yet so revealing. The man picked up his phone. He pressed a button, and what he said in a few words sent a thrill through the plane. "Yes, make sure everything is ready for arrival. I'm expecting guests. Everything has to be perfect." The intonation of his voice, clear, determined, seemed to trigger a reaction among the staff. The crew, who until then had moved around the cabin with almost mechanical discretion, stood up instantly, a subtle but perceptible change. The plane itself seemed to change under the influence of this conversation, as if the air around Elise had suddenly become heavier. A few minutes later, a slight tremor ran through the plane, but it was not a simple flight hazard. This tremor had the taste of a premonition, a sort of vibration that Elise felt deep in her bones. The first-class cabin filled with murmurs, whispers that spread like a silent wave. The passengers who until then had feigned indifference now seemed curious. Some leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. Others, more confident, indulged in exchanged glances, as if they had an intuition that something was going to change. When the plane finally landed in New York, it was like a movie scene unfolding before Elise's eyes. What followed left all passengers speechless. As soon as the plane door opened, black limousines parked in front of the airport, juxtaposing themselves against the escalators with frightening precision. One of them was already surrounded by photographers, cameras ready to capture every moment. A group of journalists were already waiting, their eyes sharp, each of them pressing the shutter button on their cameras, as if each movement of the tarmac constituted a scoop in itself. Elise, who thought that attention would be focused on another passenger, froze when she saw the man slowly get up. The air around her seemed to freeze, suspended in a space-time that had tightened around it. He walked towards the exit with an almost supernatural tranquility, his majestic appearance attracting everyone's attention. Even the crew, always smiling and elegant, stood up in close ranks, in a respectful gesture, cheering as if this man was not just a passenger but a figure of undisputed authority. Elise still couldn't understand. Why all this attention? Why him and not someone else? The staff members took up positions, forming an almost ceremonial procession of admiration. Elise, for her part, was paralyzed. His thoughts raced in a whirlwind of confusion and shame, but also of involuntary admiration. The man, indifferent to the crowd pressing around him, moved forward with a slow and measured step. His movements were slow, controlled, as if he knew exactly what he represented. The moment seemed to last forever, each second stretching under the weight of the humiliation that Elise had just endured. Murmurs grew among the passengers. He's the CEO of the company. The information spread like wildfire. The looks became more insistent, and Elise heard voices whispering behind her, some passengers uttering admiring exclamations, while she, increasingly red with confusion, felt trapped in a heavy silence. She then realized that this man was not a stranger. Far from it. He wasn't just a first-class passenger. He was the real owner, the power holder who controlled the direction of the company. A tight smile appeared on his lips. Her gaze turned to the hostess, the same young blonde woman who had served her with discreet kindness, and who now gave her a defiant look before turning away in turn. A look that bore the mark of truth, a truth that Elise had only just discovered, the invisible power of a man who did not have to conform to her expectations. Elise felt herself melting under the weight of this revelation. He was not a man like the others, this passenger. He was a monument, evidence incarnate. The truth, much greater than she had imagined, imposed itself on her with all its force, and she finally understood that the social class, appearance, and hierarchy in which she had always recognized herself were as fragile as illusions.